Hola, ¿qué tal?
Hola, ¿qué tal?
Muy bien, ¿y tú?
Muy bien.
Qué puntual, has llegado muy pronto, espera un momento.
Sí, nada, no, tranquila, si más que nada era porque quería probarlo, no vaya a ser.
Claro, tienes totalmente razón, haces muy bien. Haz intenta compartir la pantalla si quieres.
Sí,
Cierro la ventana.
que lo siento que no pudiera cubrir ayer, mañana, pero es que tengo clases y...
No te preocupes, no hay ningún problema. A ver, sí,
Bien, ¿no?
lo veo perfectamente.
Perfecto. Vale, pues lo dejo aquí abajo. Bueno, lo dejo así, ya está. Ay, fenomenal.
¿Qué tal todo?
Bueno, pues aquí con estas clases online, la verdad,
Ya.
acostumbrándome un poco porque me cuesta bastante.
Sí, ¿verdad?
Pero bueno, bien.
Ya,
Demasiadas horas delante de la pantalla, para mi
pues
gusto,
sí, eso es lo malo. Sí, al
¿verdad?
final, sí, sí. Y bueno, y luego, y no es lo mismo, vamos, no.
Ya, para nada,
Mejor,
para nada. No
mejor,
verles
mejor.
la cara, ¿verdad? Es como digo, bueno, me voy a volver youtuber, ¿sabes? Pero no me acostumbro.
Es
Ay.
verdad.
Oye, que estuve haciendo la reseña
Sí, sí. Ay,
del libro que editaste con José Manuel Losada, el último, de Myths in the Art of Visual
oh, fantástico.
Creation. Sí, me
Mil
encantó, me
gracias.
encantó. Os
Genial.
voy a mencionar en la presentación.
Bueno, muchísimas
La
gracias.
reseña creo que no ha salido todavía, ¿no? Porque no la tenéis publicada todavía el
No,
volumen, ¿no? Ah,
no,
bueno,
no,
no,
no.
claro. No tiene que ver contigo, claro, tiene que ver con Mezca. Sí,
Ah, vale.
sí, que han
Porque,
hecho como...
¿dónde lo publicáis?
Esto en el Journal of
Ah, sí,
Comparative Literature.
ya.
Sí,
Ah, en el Journal of Comparative Literature. Sí, 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 sí. Y lo está editando, este año lo está editando Metka, ¿no?
Mezca, sí.
Claro,
Y
claro,
nada, y
claro.
entonces sí, pues tuve la suerte de poder hacer la reseña de
Oh, qué bien.
vuestro libro
Pues
y
mil
así, bueno,
gracias.
me ha venido fenomenal, la verdad.
Sí, qué bien.
Sí, me ha ayudado a entender muchas cosas y tenerla así, y así que nada, pues os mencionaré un poquito.
Genial, pues mil gracias, mil gracias. ¿Y cuándo sale el volumen?
Pues no lo sé, porque yo creo que debe estar a punto, pero
Ya,
bueno, es que en la India, que es el editor, llevan su ritmo. Yo
ya,
también
sí,
edité un
sí.
volumen con ellos y un año casi de retraso, pero...
Ah, tú también lo editas. A mí me tocó también editarlo
¿Verdad?
con
Pero
Ana.
yo hice uno hace, yo qué sé, era del 2018 y no lo edité hasta el verano pasado. O
Ya,
sea,
ya,
es que este hombre se
ya,
lió, bueno, una historia.
una
Pero
locura. Sí, Ana y yo, Ana González Rivas,
claro, claro, es verdad que lo leí,
claro,
exactamente. Sí, sí.
claro. Bueno, no sabes la cantidad de emails. Bueno, a cada vez nos mandaban las correcciones, o sea, hacíamos las correcciones, las mandábamos y no lo, o sea,
No lo hacía.
no lo hacía, no sabía. Bueno,
Sí, sí,
espera,
sí. A ver.
ahora en unos minutos entrará Antonella.
Ah,
No,
que si podemos
vamos a
mandárselo, vale, yo se lo envío. A ver.
uy, haz una de. Vale,
Vale, vale, voy y se lo voy a enviar yo a
espera, que le
Asun.
digo ok.
A ver, ¿dónde está Asun?
Se lo mandas tú, ¿no?
Sí, 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 estoy ya haciéndolo.
Vale, genial. A ver, espera que me pongo aquí. Track, silencio. ¿Quieres presentar tú luego a Asun?
Es Asun, creo, la que presenta, ¿no? El panel.
Sí, no. Asun presenta el panel, pero luego o sea,
Ah,
cuando
vale,
presenta a
claro, para
ella,
presentarle a ella.
sí.
Perfecto. Vale, vale, vale,
¿Te va bien?
perfecto. Sí, 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 perfecto,
¿Tienes
perfecto.
una bio suya?
Hola, ¿qué tal?
Hola, ¿qué tal?
Hola.
¿Cómo estáis?
Muy bien, ¿qué tal, Carmen? Bueno, qué bien
Hola,
que
Sí,
hayas juntado al Congreso. Es que no lo sabíamos hasta, hasta tarde si podías o no participar.
sí, es Ana Abril la que va a llegar tarde.
Ah, vale, perfecto. Sí, Ana se va a juntar un poco más tarde.
Sí, sí,
Perfecto. Y tú eres la primera, Carmen.
sí.
Sí, primero va Carmen. Vale,
Y,
entonces Antonella sería, después de hacer mi presentación, yo presento a Asun.
exacto. ¿Tienes una
Vale.
pequeña bio suya?
Ah,
¿Quieres que te lo pase o...?
Vale, perfecto. Sí, sí, sí.
Vale, espera que lo hago ahora mismo.
Vale.
Carmen,
Carmen?
¿quieres practicar a subir,
Bien.
compartir pantalla si quieres?
Vale,
Lo que
a
quieras.
ver si se ve bien. Creo que sí. A ver. Sin problema, ¿no? ¿Lo veis?
Sí.
Perfecto. Vale, genial. Bien. Jo, me ha venido de bien que se vea el congreso porque es el único día que tengo libre en el instituto, ¿sabes?
Sí,
Así que no he tenido que pedirlo ni nada.
qué maravilla. Cuando las cosas tienen que ser, todo sucede sin
Justo.
lucha y sin esfuerzo.
Sí. Ay, mira, ahí está Asun.
Hola, Asun.
Hola, Asun, ¿qué tal?
Jolín, qué estrés, te lo juro. No
Asun.
encontraba, había borrado el enlace.
Nada.
Os envié el mensaje y luego había el mensaje, de verdad. Y estaba ahí como loca a ver si Adrián me lo podía mandar.
Bueno, no te preocupes, ya está.
Madre mía.
¿Qué tal?
Bien, todo bien, pero es que justo tenía clase y acabo de terminar la clase. Comí en 5 minutos, de verdad.
Madre mía.
Asun, ¿quieres hacer una prueba? ¿Quieres mirar a ver si puedes compartir la pantalla?
Vale, sí, yo creo que no habrá problema. Voy a ver, esperar un segundo porque creo que no tengo abiertos los documentos, pero las chicas también van a compartir, ¿verdad?
Sí.
Por eso, porque yo no tengo los de ellas.
No, cada uno
Vale, perfecto. Asun.
lo has recibido, ¿verdad, Siana?
Sí, fenomenal. Muchísimas gracias.
De nada.
Vale.
Vale,
Perfecto.
pues compartir pantalla. ¿Lo veis?
Sí.
Sí, perfecto.
Vale, pues creo que y se moverá. A ver, tengo que ver cómo.
A ver.
Porque el Zoom, como últimamente usamos el Collaborate y usamos el otro, el Google Meet, pues no se mueve, ¿no?
Sí.
Vale. Pues ya está. Bueno, pues muchísimas gracias. Qué pánico, de verdad.
No te preocupes. Menos mal que empezamos, ¿sabes? Por eso empezamos 15 minutos antes o 10 para que no haya estos...
Vale, Adrián también veo que ya se ha conectado. Adrián, gracias. Lo siento por el pánico de último momento. De verdad. Se me ve bien porque estoy en un sillón que me resulta cómodo, pero tengo la limitación a veces que me dicen que se ve mal. ¿Está suficiente?
Es un poco oscuro, pero tienes
Sí,
que
pero
quizás
bueno.
a lo mejor bajar un poco la cámara porque se te ve
A ver, bajo la
eso, mejor. Así, perfecto.
Vale.
Muy bien. Y está un poco oscuro, pero bueno.
A ver, voy a ver si puedo mover las luces un poquito. Voy a silenciar el móvil. Pues nada. Y luego se graba porque he estado siguiendo el de esta mañana
Sí.
y sale directamente por el Facebook, ¿no?
Oh,
A ver.
Exacto. Entonces ahora, Asun, si quitas tu ponencia de
Sí.
la pantalla, luego Adrián me va a mandar un enlace y le doy al botón y ya salimos, o sea, cuando estemos listas, le doy y ya salimos en Facebook.
Fenomenal.
Vale,
Espera, que voy a imprimir la bio de Asun.
vale. Y
No
luego-
se oye, resuena, porque es que en el Collaborate me dicen los estudiantes que resuena.
No, está muy
Vale.
bien.
Pues fenómeno, porque entonces voy a cerrar porque ando quitando y poniendo el sonido todo el rato para que no estorbe, pero si no hay
Sí.
problema.
No, pero lo que hay que hacer cuando habla uno, todos los demás tienen que
Silenciarse.
silenciar el micrófono. Eso
Claro.
seguro.
Vale,
Sí,
perfecto.
eso sí. Vale, pues genial, pues voy a abrir el documento para presentaros y ya está. Presento a todas de golpe al principio.
No, yo
Antonella.
creo que es casi mejor si tú presentas primero a Carmen,
Vale.
luego Carmen da su ponencia y luego hay 10 minutos de preguntas y las preguntas
Vale.
las lees en el chat.
Vale.
Las lees en voz alta. Yo creo que es mejor, Asun, que lo lees en voz alta, así todo el mundo lo podemos escuchar. Y luego
Vale.
Carmen contestas y luego presentas a Siana. Y no sé cómo se pronuncia tu nombre, perdona. Yo digo Siana.
Shiana.
Shiana.
Yo lo pronuncio también siempre mal.
Va.
No pasa nada, no pasa nada. Espera, estaba probando la mía. Así, vale, ya está. Sí, no
Y
pasa nada.
entonces, Siana, ¿tú me vas a presentar a mí
Sí,
entonces?
sí, sí, sí. Ujú.
Genial.
Y yo si quieres miro el chat para las preguntas, ¿vale? Para tus preguntas.
Genial.
Pues la verdad que está, bueno, yo también puedo mirarlas, pero por si se me escapa alguna, pues genial, la verdad.
Muy bien. Y solo pediros, por favor, porque luego solo tenemos media hora,
Sí.
luego para la siguiente sesión, de
Sí.
intentar ser muy puntuales, ¿vale?
Sí.
O sea, sí, intentar terminar en las 2 horas que tenemos. Tenemos hasta las 4:30. Entonces, bueno, que las ponencias sean de máximo 20 minutos, 10 minutos de preguntas y así no hay estrés para la siguiente.
Sí, yo tengo aquí el timer aquí para...
Sí.
Genial, muchísimas gracias.
Estoy practicando y me sale un minuto más, pero no, yo corto, corta y 20.
Vale.
Ay,
Fenomenal. Bueno,
qué nervios.
y luego Ana entrará más tarde, entonces,
Sí.
pero no pasa nada. Entra, la veremos y allí arriba en la pantalla y ya está. Entonces, ¿qué más? Ya está, yo creo que
Pues sí, quedan 4 minutos.
quedan unos minutos, exacto. ¿Habéis podido escuchar a las de esta mañana?
Sí,
¿O,
muy bien.
o ayer?
Yo
A
los
las de
2
esta
días
mañana.
y la verdad que todo
Ayer.
está saliendo muy bien todo.
Genial, genial, qué bien. Y no habéis ido a la facultad, ¿no? Porque, bueno, no.
No, yo tenía clase, es que tenía los 2 días clase de 12:30 a 2:30. Entonces, justamente, claro, he terminado la clase antes y para poder, y he escuchado las ponencias hasta las 12:30. Luego ya tenía clase y ya no he podido.
Claro.
Y entonces, claro, si estaba en la facultad era es más complicado hacer la clase online, porque nos tocaba online esta semana.
Vale,
Entonces digo, pues ya todo online y se acabó.
vale. ¿Y alguna de vosotras ha podido ver algo en YouTube o en Facebook de...
Yo ayer seguí la de Buxton, la seguí por YouTube, que puse algunas preguntas allí, si te acuerdas, Antonella.
Claro, claro,
Y
claro.
las de esta mañana las he seguido por Facebook porque en el YouTube no las encontraba. Entonces Julia me mandó el enlace al Facebook.
Ah, entonces no, vale. Bueno,
En
eso
el YouTube no las encontraba, no sabía por qué no salían. Salían 2 de
ya,
los paneles, pero el tercer panel, que era el que yo quería, el nuestro de SIM, pues no
claro,
salía en el YouTube. Entonces le escribí a Julia y me mandó el enlace al Facebook.
ya, ok. Ok, y lo pudiste
Y lo
ver.
compartí en el Facebook mío también.
Vale, ok, bueno, pues eso habrá que ver cómo, bueno, cómo solucionarlo. Bueno, a ver, Adrián todavía no me ha mandado el enlace para Facebook, entonces esperamos un poquito más.
Madre mía, es que esto de llevar todo el control de la parte tecnológica es complicado.
Es complicado, menos mal que está Adrián, la verdad,
Sí.
porque Adrián, bueno, fantástico, solo soluciona todas estas cosas. Sí, y también lo de esta mañana, porque parece ser había un problema con la conexión en la facultad, en el salón de actos. Entonces la ponencia de Luis, bueno, ha tenido que ser interrumpida un par de veces porque no había conexión en la facultad. Pero bueno, luego ya...
Dice que se está
Sí, se está transmitiendo en
retransmitiendo.
Facebook.
Ah, ya está. Vale, perfecto. Bueno, pues te dejo la palabra, Asun, si quieres, en un minuto.
Good afternoon. We have a panel in English with 4 speakers. I'm going to be moderating the panel. ¿Ya estoy? Ok, estamos online, ¿no? En Facebook, thanks. and getting the information from the technicians that we're online. So let me start by presenting our first speaker, Carmen Marquez Garcia. She's completing her last year in the doctoral program in literary studies at Complutense University. And she's focusing her studies on hybrid narratologies in science fiction. And she's a member of STEAM Research Group, which is one of the, it's organizing this panel together with one this morning and one later today. And Carmen is going to talk about the underworld or wonderland, hell in the narratologies of women with mental disorders. So after Carmen speaks, you can of course pose your questions in the chat and she will try to answer them. So thank you very much for joining us.
Okay. Thanks, Asen, for your introduction. Very nice. It's a pleasure always to be here sharing this experience with you. Thanks for all of you that have joined us online. So I'm going to share the presentation. I'm going to be try to stick to time. So I'm going to ask you to cross the threshold with me during the next 20 minutes. We will walk along 4 different women who have suffered several disorders: anorexia, bulimia, and schizophrenia, accompanying them on their journey through the underworld and sometimes wonderland of their mental illnesses. Like the epic heroes of the Aeneid or the Odyssey, Dante's Pilgrim, or the little Alice in her underground adventures and through the looking glass, our protagonists have had the descent to the deepest circle of the underworld to later be reborn. And haven't they? Maybe not, we will see. So to carry out the following presentation, we have to start from a series of autobiographical texts written by women in the second half of the 20th century. You have here the different autobiographies that vertebrates this work. And so the work is structured around these texts, whose common point is the path traveled by the protagonists in their fight against different mental disorders. The memoirs that appear throughout the article are the ones that you can see here in the screen, in the slide. And I'm going to compare her journey to the underworld with Dante's Inferno, Lewis Carroll Wonderland, or The World Through the Looking Glass sometimes. Drawing on Carroll playful texts, these storytellers share more intimate wonderlands within the medically recognizable framing categories or called circles in their illness, because they have like parallelism with Dante's Inferno of circles, and the hybridation of reference to underground spaces, Dante's Inferno on the one hand and Carroll's Wonderland on the other hand, creates a kind of ambiguous portmanteau, like the suitcase, memory that is at once serious but frivolous, public but intimate at the same time, and rational and sometimes ungovernable. Okay, so the first step, you have to cross the threshold. So many autobiographies that present a mental illness, like anorexia, for example, represent the experience of crossing the threshold from the everyday life to the real. So like real with capital letters. And they register a single moment of rupture. I mean like a dissociation where the ordinary self is separated from the disordered self. So they become two. So for example, Susanna Kaysen, writing about her personality disorder, she was diagnosed bipolar, compares herself with the girl in Vermeer painting. You have it here. So she said, like the girl in Vermeer's painting, interrupted at her music, as my life has been interrupted in the music of being 17. Or for example, Maria Horbacher, describing a 14 years struggle with an eating disorder, bulimia and anorexia later, recalls, one minute I was an average 9-year-old, and the next minute I was sticking my fingers down my throat. They are like very, very hard and like really harsh memories to read, like really, really strong. So they represent the onset of illness as a causal rupture, as I said before. Such memoirs often draw upon the image of Dante Pilgrim, who found himself lost nel mezzo del cammino di nostra vita, so in the half of the path of our life. And this rupture to mental health precipitates the remembered former self onto a journey through an infernal space. I mean, Hades or hell. And quote here, on a perilous journey from which you may never return, as the protagonists say. Ever so easy to go, harder to find your way back. So once you enter, you may remain there forever. Both these passages recall Dante's wayfaring pilgrim, who in turns recall Virgil's epic hero Aeneas. In contrast to Dante's Inferno, in Wasted and Girl Interrupted from Hornbacher, we have this dissociation, but the protagonists are quite young. No, for example, Dante's protagonist was like a middle-aged man, like with a strong personality, very clear intention. So when the journey of the stems for this girl is contrasted with that of a more experienced and iconic pilgrim, it seems that it lacks some authority because they don't have any control on their lives. So then another reference of another underground word, such as being Wonderland or Through the Looking Glass. So for example, Susanna Kaysen says about that, I wasn't simply going nuts, tumbling down a shaft into Wonderland. It was my misfortune, or maybe my salvation, to be at all time perfectly conscious of my misperceptions. So this allusion also accentuates the proximity to the Carol protagonist rather than Dante's, because like similar to her, she is always aware of the differences between everyday reality and the reality she is living in Wonderland. So in Maria's work, allusions to the Dantean journey are cleverly combined with the two Alice books, Through the Looking Glass and Wonderland. And she is always moving between these two walls. So she say, and so I went through the looking glass, stepped into the netherwall, where up is down and foot is grid, where convex mirrors cover the walls. Okay, we are gonna now talk about different appreciation about the looking glass or the mirror for women. So these hybrid memoirs are closely related to Sichu, Écriture féminine, and it's that Through the Looking Glass was a seminal text for Irigaray and Thisol, and their explorations on how female subjectivity could be created outside the structures of the patriarchal symbolic discourse. For example, for Irigaray, in that text that is not one, the mirror is like an exclusive instrument for the male gaze. So either the woman is trapped without an identity in the patriarchal society or on this side of the mirror, or she is trapped on the other side, in which according to that sex that is not one, is a synonymous of a wonderland, the underworld, that unconscious, a state of non-subjectivity. In Hornbacher memoir, certainly captured the relationship between the onset of his illness and the mirror. So she perfectly reflects these thoughts about Irigaray. So she feels betrayed by a growing body. She said, like, at the beginning, she was just a typical little girl, round and healthy, given to climbing, nakedness, the hungers of the flesh. So she is looking at herself in the mirror, and she says, suddenly I felt a split in my brain. I didn't recognize her. I was divided into two, the self in my head and the girl in the mirror. However, when she decided to pass through the looking glass, because remember, this is totally voluntary, its nature changes as she enters in a realm in which female subjectivity, albeit in a chaotic way, becomes possible. So here there are a lot of references to the adventures of Carol's Alice, begin to gain weight over allusion to Dante Inferno, producing the image of an ambiguous word. Is at the same time a superficial reality of seemingly continuous normality and a deep reality in which Maria undertakes a quest to discover a different kind of self. So it's a journey of self-discovery. So the idea of this journey to regain the lost self is, of course, the essential of Dante's Inferno, the Dante's trip on the wall. But in this autobiography, the search is also seen as an escape from unrecognized and impossible female subjectivity. So she says, I was carefully constructing my own private hell, two plots circling each other. There was self by day and self by night. So she has two different personalities. During the day, she is one person. During the night, she is totally transformed. Right. Then, as I said before, This crossing of the threshold may be voluntary sometimes, or it can be seen as a tumble. So for example, in the case of Hornbacher, she passes the point of no return before she even consciously consents to embark on the journey to the underworld. This trip is like a stumble, at the same time accidental and provoked, like Alice fall. I mean, she falls because she's following the white rabbit. So when she crosses this hole, she knows that she no longer belongs to this reality of the upper world. She's now in a new world, in a new realm with different rules. So this is totally different of the crossing of the thresholds by Dante's Pilgrim. In the case of Dante, he experiences the underworld as a malevolent space, or at least theologically speaking, the underworld is has some goodness that consists on its ability to deliver souls from their states of sinfulness. In this case, Alice's underworld may be harsh and strict, but it is, of course, a wonderland. Alice experiences an underground metamorphosis, but not only in a negative way. She and the reader evolve together at the same time through delight and entertainment. Similarly, while Maria's self-inflicted journey to the underworld is understood by her older self as fatally dangerous, and where she wants her readers not to follow her, it is also an experience she evidently benefits from because she is transformed. If we remember the different stages of the pilgrim or the hero's journey from Campbell, there is the fall, and then you are reborn. So you come back to the normal world, totally transformed. Okay, then like Dante, in this case, Maria wishes to be saved by an authority, in this case, a doctor who finally found what happened to her. So the origin of her illness and cured, but she also wants to be fixed inside this fantasy world that she has created. And at the same time, there is part of Maria that wishes to remain as she is. Thus, she sleeps between the texts of Dante and Carroll continuously and between Wonderland and the other side of the looking glass. There are a lot of references to Dante that create expectation of a redemptive infernal journey. So if we have gone through all of this, we want a reward at the end, right? So for example, in this case, she wants the lost self finally finds grace in hell and emerges to become a saved supernatural narrator with authority and epic, of course. But allusions to Alice's stories subvert these expectations, as the narrator misses the opportunity to speak in a consciously public and ambitiously epic voice to address her reader with a guilty, intimate, and confessional tone. That guilt can be seen as we read these books. They are really, really short. You can find them on the internet. I will leave some links after this. So finally, these contemporary memoirs written by women like Wasted combine narrative strategies and themes of Dante and Carroll in at least 4 different but independent ways. The first one is the topography of the real and material world, in which mental illness projects the protagonist is presented as an infernal landscape, stopped in time, exactly like Dante's hell. So the experience of the disease is funnel-shaped. Each stage of the disease is narrower and more painful than the previous one, as we can see in the second picture here. And at the same time, taking the example of the 2 texts by Lewis Carroll, Hornbacher represents this underworld as a space that radicalizes the protagonist, empowering her to resist the demons she meets along the way. So she's being continuously encouraged by the experience and the adventures that she overcomes underworld. Then second, the story and development of the disease is presented as a journey to the underworld. So we can compare it with a maze, like the maze in the four picture, that is the maze of the Queen of Hearts. So first you cross the threshold that leads to a mythical world, which is at the same time an unfortunate or self-destructive fall through the rabbit hole. Then in third place is more linguistic one. So the narrator represents her formal being as a subject in search of a secret knowledge. Generally, the secret being sought is the cause or source of her mental illness. So it's a quest. Like her previous self, the narrator faces challenges throughout her speech, For example, she needs to find a language and a form that together can articulate her forbidden knowledge and convey it to the reader. That is the main aim of this autobiography. The logic of the narration, according to Jonathan Kuller's analysis, suggests that the protagonist's fatal tremble has occurred as a consequence of the lack of a language in which to express a sense of psychic disorder. In this situation, Carol's slippery nonsense wordplay and puns becomes an important supplement to Dante's language, so they correspond each other. His controlled terza rima is a universalizing middle style, his confident epic voice, and so on. And then finally, the fourth common point that they have, from an underworldly perspective on the underworld, the narrator offers a satirical view of overworldly values and cultural norms. We have to remember that in Alice in Wonderland and Alice Through the Looking Glass is a very, it's a strong critic of the society of the time. So in Dante's Inferno, the poet observes contemporary culture from an alien perspective, launching his most scathing criticism of the political system. But his hell is also a place where divine and rational justice is expressed, where all punishment is perfectly adapted to each sin. However, these types of autobiographies often invoke the more modern secular sense of hell as a historical place or event that expresses human injustice and unreason. Thus, the Word of Alice Looking Glass, where things seems to be upside down, and Wonderland, that is governed by an absurd logic that has nonsense, come closer to reflect the experience of these writers of a life lived outside the normal space of a social exchange. Okay. In the memoirs, finally, I'm going to compare the Asylum with Dante's Underworld and Wonderland. So in the memoirs, where the experience of a psychological illness is narrated, when mental instability is portrayed as a space of eternal suffering, it often seems that they lack the seriousness and solidity of Dante's hell. We have said like the protagonists were very, very young. When they fall into this illness, they were like 14, 15, they were teenagers. So the allusions to Dante serve to emphasize the provisionality or absurdity of the institution dedicated to curing and managing madness. Furthermore, removing the patient from a normal social context and placing her in an extra-temporal space has the dual effect of stripping her of her free will while radicalizing her consciousness, because they need to be surrounded by normality, not just to be isolated in an institution surrounded by mad people. So the patient relationship with the subterranean space in Dante and Caroline, submissive and playful, is like at the same time is kind of dual. So for example, in Wasted of Hornbacher, for example, there are 3 institutions classified according to the degree of the disease and the severity with which they are treated. They are first, the Methodist House, the Low House, and Wilmar. The last one is the deepest hell in Dante's Divine Comedy. While Wasted, for example, in this case, provides a particularly pronounced example of a specially differentiated space, other memories create similar gradation and implicit moral hierarchies. For example, in the last autobiography that I have analyzed, Fun at Night, Just to Say You're Alive, it's like a diary that records an 11-month struggle against schizophrenia, suicidal depression, and psychosis. The author, Linda Hart, represents the institution where she was hospitalized as a Dantean underworld that is divided into a higher and lower realms. Her diary begins in the lowest hell, called Brenton Ward, on the hospital, and the protagonist here was admitted due to a suicide attempt, so she tried to kill herself. Later, when she kind of overcome this illness, she is transferred to the psychiatric ward in a general hospital, which she characterized as the upper hell, run by a minus figure, an empathetic doctor called Graham Drake, who administers drugs dosage and issues transfer order to Brenton. So she's always in danger of go back to the lower hell. So in her schizophrenia memoir, Welcome Silence of Carol North, depicts the psychiatric ward of her hospital as a hell, a medieval error that induces an overwhelmed sense of dependency leading to despair. So when you cross the threshold for the first time, you feel as if you leave the material world behind. She said, first, A pair of double doors swallow my head. Is this the entrance to infinity? So the representation of the institution as a hierarchy, third space placed somewhere outside the normal world recalls the claustrophobic spaces of Dante's funnel, Inferno. In the same way, the feeling of despair that the patient feels upon being admitted to the institution remind us to the message that Dante Pilgrim read over the gates to hell that says, abandon hope, all of you that enter. So I'm going to finish here because I feel like we are running out of time. So it's been like 20 minutes. But like very quick, there's like resemblance to the experience of the mental disorder as a journey, as I said before. It can be voluntary or accidental. When you fall into this underworld, then you go to the journey, the hero's journey, following like the challenges, you find your guide, and then you are supposed to be reborn with like absolute knowledge, but it may not be true. In this case, in two of the autobiographies, at the end, the protagonists, they go back to the institution and they like go out and go back like 3 or 4 times. And sometimes rebirth doesn't happen. Okay, so thank you. And now it's the turn of questions, right?
Yes, thank you very much, Carmen. That was a highly original presentation. Thank you a lot. And the floor is open for questions from the audience or from our panel itself. Thank you.
Well, I'll start.
Yes, of course, Sienna.
Yes, thank you very much, Carmen. Very interesting. Since you mentioned radical feminists such as Lucy Irigaray, I was wondering if you have incorporated or if you are considering to incorporate it into this dichotomy that you are presenting, the very reflection of the dichotomy of the public and the private, which is at the core of the discrimination of patriarchal roles. And I found interesting that you mentioned Irigaray a couple of times, but you have not included this reflection, which is at the core of radical feminists in the 70s in the US.
Yeah, I'm like, of course, I will love to continue developing this topic. And there's like a chapter, because this is like part of an essay that I started writing last year. One of the girls, she writes like she was in Tokyo, she was having sex, and on top of the bed there was like a mirror. So she was like looking herself, and she abandoned the body, and she was like being aware of all these social and private dichotomy of Irigaray. So but yeah, like I had to focus on the mythological part. So it was like I had no time to develop more that, but yeah, of course.
I don't know. I cannot see any questions in the chat so far. But anyway, I think because we started, the timetable is a little bit un-Spanish. It's not typically Spanish. People are probably at their lunch, so they might join us later. And in any case, I have one question from Metka just now. Thank you, Metka. I just wanted to underscore that this topic has been dealt with in a similar manner last year in the European Society of Comparative Literature conference, with the emphasis on the myth of Persephone and the image for anorexia. That's right, Metka. Thank you for this address, because it is true. I was actually present in this conference, and it is true. It's thank you so much for this. So I'm not sure if you have any questions, but any additional questions, but we have the next speaker, Shiana Sotelo. She's also going to talk about a topic related to women's studies, gender studies. So maybe we can welcome questions for Carmen even after Shiana speaks. So, okay, so let me introduce, we move on. Let me introduce Xiana Sotelo. She's associate professor at Complutense and teaches courses on literature of the United States, and her main lines of research are cultural and literary studies, gender and women's studies, critical thinking, and responsible research in innovation in the humanities. And she's going to talk about the superheroine Miss Marvel's Kamala Khan, the intercultural resignification of the myth of the Moiras in science fiction narratives. So whenever you like, Xiana. Thank you. I think your audio is off, Xiana. We have the vision, but we don't have the audio.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, okay, thank you. So thank you so much. It's a great pleasure for me to be here in this fascinating conference. And I'll be talking to you today about superhero Miss Marvel Kamala Khan, the resonification of the myth of the Moiras in science fiction narratives. Kamala Khan, she's a fascinating 16-year-old Pakistani American who transcends human limits and becomes inhuman. She's obsessed with Marvel, that then becomes Captain Marvel, and the Avengers. She's always writing fiction about them. And one day she discovers that she's got incredible powers thanks to the inheritance of the Inhumans, which allows her to gain polyformic powers, lengthen arms, change her body shape, and in the end, she ends up adopting the name Miss Marvel. This teenager debuted in the Marvel Universe in 2013. She has a monthly comic series since 2014, and finally, a few months ago, she has joined the League of the Avengers. Her mythical elements, the comic and the video game, will be explored from a cultural myth criticism and an Anglo-European feminism perspective as the resonification of the myth of the Moiras, powerful women and who personified destiny in ancient Greek. Unveiling the fascination for supernatural transcendence, new resignifying Moiras such as Kamala allow for an exploration of female empowering that contributes to the destiny of heterogeneous worlds. As José Manuel Losada reminds us and explains in New Forms of Myth in 2015, one of the defining features of our 21st century Anglo-European societies is that we are currently undergoing a process of resonification of myth in other sociocultural myths. And this process of renaming is driven by globalization forces, by new forms of social media, communication, and science fiction effects, driven by capitalist markets, by the logic of consumerism. So we need to understand that technology has gradually changed and modified the nature of science production, distribution, and reception, and thus the entire system of human thought, representation, and culture. Since the end of the 20th century, all these technological advances have triggered a paramount storytelling shift that really has altered the interactions between receivers and informants. So in the face of this profound transformation, editors José Manuel Losada and Antoniela Limson remind us in the myth on the audiovisual creation that is necessary to address the extent to what these technological changes are affecting mythical stories. So when we think about the Greek goddesses or the Greek entities that had the destiny in their hands, and this to the question who controls destiny, which really has haunted humanity since its origins. Well, in ancient Greek, we find that this personification became clear with the appearance of the Moiras. And Homer speaks of as fate, as one singular impersonal power, referring to the Moiras, but it is in the 8th century before Christ where we find records such as the poet Hesiod, who refers to these three personification of women who spin the threads of human destiny. And it is interesting because even though they were really powerful, they were deprecated to the underworld and not in the Olympus, right? And so to understand the resinification of the myth of the Moors in our contemporary societies, we need to take into account the unprecedented Western canonical knowledge and philosophy that has taken place since the first decades of the 20th century. We find that it's been an unprecedented decolonization of Western imagination and Western philosophy, from psychoanalysis that first puts limits to the Western psyche and ego, to structuralist theories, Saussure, Derrida, Barthes, Fanon. They all address this opposition of binaries that have governed Western philosophy. We have Dubois, Foucault. They have unearthed the power relations implied in the discursive and material levels. And so a new understanding of a new demarcation of power and a new understanding of transcendence and destiny, it's been urged to be liberated from what is being imposed from us from centuries. And from an Anglo-European point of view, a radical positioning awoke, especially in the US in the 70s, determined to free gender from patriarchal constraints. So when Kate Millett, for example, in the Sexual Contract, stated that the personal is the political, both the private and the private became the state of minds, the locations, and the concepts that needed to be rescued from repressive gender roles. And we also need to take into account that secular views have also completely changed the understanding of what human's destiny is. And also, you know, as I said, this radical feminism, the idea that the power comes within ourselves, especially we're talking about female power. And so this is a power that is being usurpated by patriarchal religions and patriarchal philosophies and traditions, and is now reappropriated again. And it's appropriated again thanks to science fiction effects that have allowed to have access to the extreme. And we see in these science fiction narratives, we see this, that they reflect this change in consciousness, this change in individuality, where destiny is no longer in the underworld, in the private, it's in the public, it's in the skies, right? So in this quest from transcendence, by becoming inhuman, by gaining these powers, multicultural female characters such as Kamala, they are appropriating the stream, right? Jose Manuel Losada refers to this as the usurpation of the stream, but I refer it as appropriation because they are reclaiming their visibility through science fiction effects. And so in the case of Kamala, even though she already had powers in the comic, it is really in the video game where she's elevated to the status of a Avenger superheroine. And it is in this video game that where Kamala really holds the key in the destiny of Avengers Reunion. And of course, we need to take into account the blurred boundaries between fantasy and fiction. But by holding the key in the destiny of the Avengers Reunion, we see how, in the light of science fiction and the logic of consumerism, these powerful women, these powerful teenagers, they have become superheroines who are re-signifying the myth. They have become the embodiment of a new generation of powerful women who are no longer in the underworld, but in between heterogeneous worlds. They're flying around in our science fiction narratives with the message that the power and our destiny is within ourselves, as opposed to the Moiras that had the destiny of the divine creatures and humans at their mercy. So this is allowing, this appropriation of the stream is allowing women and represented groups to transform and to metamorphosize into these superheroines, again, in control of their own destinies. Also, we need to take into account that in all these science fiction narratives, there is this quest for mythical elements. We find that Kamala is surrounded, is monitored by Medusa, and also by Thor. But really, when the digital interactions allow for transgression and ambiguity, we really need to question how to identify the authenticity in mythical stories. And in that sense, Jose Manuel Losada in Myth in the Digital Age, he really proposes and guidance in answering this question, because he articulates a definition in progress that becomes an applicable formula to test authenticity in the science fiction audiovisual formats. And this definition illustrates the essential narratives and elements that are required in order to differentiate mythical accounts from other types of narrative accounts. So, as he annotates, authenticity in the myth is unraveled if it compromises an explanatory, symbolic, and dynamic account of one or various personal or extraordinary events with transcendent reference. What lacks in principle historical testimony is made up of a series of invariant elements reducible to themes submitted to crisis, and presents a conflictive, emotive, functional character, and always refers to an absolute cosmogony, eschatology, either particular or universal. So when we ask if we can find in Kamala science fiction narrative these mythical elements, well, first of all, from the very first two sentences of the story, we find that Kamala is struggling to balance between the Western US attitudes and her own Pakistani Muslim culture. She's balancing this battling superhuman supervillains and the pressures of a very highly conservative family background. In that sense, she's been claimed to be one of the most relatable superheroes on the scene. I mean, she's a teenager and she feels a little bit of an outcast, like all teenagers do. She wants to fit with the popular kids at school, and she really clashes with her family on normal things that teenagers clash about, going to parties, about boys, right? And of course, her faith really adds an extra layer of complexity in her search for her own identity. But it's not really what defines her, you know? I mean, and of course, we find that when we can say that her call to action is also a call to the Quran. She remembers how her father would quote these phrases that gave her strength and courage, like whoever saves a person is saving a whole mankind. But it really, again, it's not what defines her. Here we find the really interesting process here in finding this conflictive character is this process of awakening of consciousness, this passage from human existence to inhuman existence. And it's funny because, I mean, she goes through this pterogenesis and she gets immersed in this hallucination stage. And she emerges in this transcendent moment as with powers, but as this blonde, blue-eyed woman, as a reflection of this obsession that she has with Miss Marvel, Captain Marvel. But again, you know, she wonders, well, you know, if I look strong, if I look confident and beautiful, why I don't feel it? So here we find that she's really struggling to fit in with these ideas of essentialist views of feminism, of femininity, but she is coming to terms with her own subjectivity and embracing her own identity and difference as the source of her empowerment. And this is really a powerful message, right? The realization that there is nobody she would rather be than herself. And of course, here we see that coming to terms in this process of awakening, we can identify in the passage from becoming human to inhuman, we can identify this individual cosmogony in the story. And also what I found very interesting is the possibility to approach this moment of transcendence from an Anglo-European feminism point of view as an intersectional transcendence, right? Because again, this process, it reflects and mirrors the very process of evolution of differences that has been taking place within Anglo-European feminism since the 60s, 70s, 80s, when differences were a source of separation among women. Then in the 90s, it became a source of empowerment. But again, in the 90s, there was a moment where the category of women was impossible to be pronounced in a consensual way by feminists themselves. Let's imagine that there were very conflicted theoretical approaches, also due to these virtual scenarios, postmodernism, and post-structuralism. They were all defending the collapse of fixed categories of meaning to free our identity. And then we have this women of color movement, other marginalized groups saying, yes, okay, we can collapse these categories when we are referring to the patriarchal, universal Western subject, but we cannot afford to eliminate categories. We need these categories to show that our vindication for visibility and inclusion, right? For example, remember that Judy Byler's performativity theory, that is one of the most, is a very popular theory, is completely contradictory and conflicting with women of color. Judy Byler's claim that identity is oppressive and therefore empowerment comes from the liberation of all identity. Women of color reply, well, it's easy to give up an identity when you have one, right? So there was a clash. It was impossible to name women in consensual ways. And that's when we find intersectional identities as a middle ground, right? As a ground that embraces collapse of categories and meaning, but at the same time recognizes the situated identity and the situated knowledge. And when we talk about, for example, the idea of heterogeneous worlds, well, we find that Kamala is a key character in the Avengers video game story. With the Avengers dismantle and the advanced idea mechanics turning society against superheroes and superheroines, Kamala is forced to hide her powers. But her unwavering loyalty to the Avengers, her intelligence, her ever-optimistic personality leads her to uncover a grand conspiracy. And then little by little, she learns how to use her powers, and she sets out to reunite the most powerful superheroes on Earth. And here we find traces of eschatology in her role in the final destiny of humans and inhumans. And of course, she's a unifier, you know, she's bringing the Avengers together. She's got superhero powers as any other Avenger. She's not laying down for anyone. And those boundaries, those powers cross boundaries. People can relate to it. She's rebellious. And that's why it makes so much sense that she's an entry point character in the video game, because she's that person with different backgrounds and experiences that a lot of people can relate to. And of course, she appeals to a vast majority of viewers by providing female images that are not based on sex appeal. She's not highly sexualized. She's not becoming to this sexual object as the traditional superheroines portrayal with big breasts. And, you know, so her appearance, her personality, her multicultural background allows for an exploration of female empowering that is completely addressed from aggressive sexuality, and that crosses boundaries. But mostly she has a very powerful message that you can be in control of your own destiny and you can influence the destiny of others. So as a conclusion, impelled by the eternal questions for, not the internal questions, eternal quest for supernatural transcendence in our lives, we see that science fiction narratives are providing a platform to replace mythical narratives. And in this scenario, editors Lozada and Lipscomb reminds us that it's necessary to interrogate and to revise. And really the challenge is rescuing the authentic mythical narrative from the shaping forces of our contemporary society, our global markets, consumption markets. And so from a myth criticism point of view, I have approached this resonification of the myth of the Moiras through the appropriation of the stream that is allowing historically subjugated subjects to reclaim visibility, appropriating these differences and achieving individual cosmology and control over their own destinies. Through this racinification, we find that gender roles are also becoming less and less traditional. She's fighting off stereotypes. And again, this appropriation of extreme in science fiction allows for a change in tone in traditional representation of superheroines and shapeshifters, in the sense that mainstream science fiction is becoming more inclusive, more diverse. And that is important because all these superheroines become collective imaginaries that shape identities and subjectivities. So the resignified moras of a new generation of digital natives emerge as intersectional superheroines with the potential to trigger changes in our heterogeneous fates. These role models are willing, potentially, and transformative mythical powers in our social cultural imaginations. And in this sense, it's important the realization that myths continue to be particular, they're suitable tools for knowledge in our society and ourselves. So in sum, in the analysis of this superheroine, Miss Marvel Kamala Khan, as a resinification of the myth of the Moras, I have intended to contribute to the study of myths considered as a valid tool capable of helping us to understand the conundrum of human nature and who is in control of destinies. Most importantly, it unfolds how the impact of transcendence in our life is still a prevailing devotion in science fiction narratives. Well, thank you very much. And I don't know if you have any questions, I would gladly take them.
Thank you, Shanna. We do have some reactions in the chat. It's a pity that we cannot let people actually ask the questions with their voice. And we have Professor Metka Zupantic, who is always very energetic and very participative, and we miss her contact here. But she has a comment that I'm going to read up aloud. Using the same definition to test recognized myths. Also, I wanted to mention that in the late 1990s, we had an issue of the journal Religiologique in Montreal, not about myths in the comics or video games, but about Orpheus and Eurydice, with a very strong presence of a new Eurydice who decides in literature at the time not to stay in the underworld. Jean Shinoda Bolem in Goddesses in Every Woman deals with various types of Persephone incarnations in our psyche, especially those that do not stay in the underworld. And I'm so glad to see you, Shanna, and to have the opportunity to hear your paper.
Oh,
We miss you, Metka. God, I mean, like, this is your topic. You could have been actually, you know, very much involved in this panel with Carmen and Shiana, because they're both talking about much of the research, the kind of research you do. So thank you for the comments.
Thank you so much.
Anybody else asking questions? Our panelists or anybody in the audience? I'm also looking in Facebook in case we have comments there, but so far so good. Okay, so maybe we continue.
Okay.
Shanna, Anna is going to speak before me, so I will introduce her and I will finish. Okay.
Okay.
So, yeah, we're breaking a little bit the schedule here because Anna really she was listed last because she was coming from school and we were afraid she was not going to make it. But I think it's better for me to close since I am the moderator. So let me present Ana Abril Hernández, and she holds a PhD from Universidad Complutense de Madrid on literary studies. And she currently she's an English teacher, secondary school, and her areas of research revolve around Anglo-American literature and its connection with cultural and gender approaches. So Anna's scholarly investigations focus on the comparative study of literature, also from an intermediate and mythic lens, which is very much in line with what we do in SIM research program. And Anna is going to be talking about articulating female empowerment, filmic renderings of the mythological princess Ariadne in science fiction and fantasy. So whenever you like, you have the floor. I think your mic is off, Anna.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me
Yes.
now?
Perfect. Yes. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Professor Lopez Varela. I would like to start this presentation. Can you please, first of all, confirm that you can see the screen I'm sharing with you? Can you see the screen I'm sharing with you with my presentation?
Everything is fine, Anna.
Right.
Yes.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you. I would like to start by thanking the organizers of this 6th International Conference on Myth Criticism for accepting my paper, which is also very much connected to the developing studies, research that I'm doing for the studies in intermediality and intercultural mediation, the SIM group, research group at Complutense University, and of course to the research project Aglaya from Complutense University as well. I'm going to be talking about female women, in particular Ariadne, the mythological Greek princess, and I'm going to be comparing two different versions of this Ariadne. One in a science fiction movie, the other one in a fantasy movie. Now, the science fiction movie I'm analyzing is Inception by Christopher Nolan from the year 2010. And the fiction movie I'll be comparing it with is Labyrinth by Jim Henson. It's a masterpiece, it's really well known, from 1986. The connection between these two movies is not only that there are two characters, two women, who are easily connected to the Greek princess Ariadne, not only because in Inception, the female protagonist's name is also Ariadne, but also because we have labyrinths in both movies. And now labyrinths has been the topic of, rather the interest of my research for a few years now. So I'll be dealing with the image portrayed of this mythological character, how she relates to labyrinths, how labyrinths are presented and what they represent. In Inception, the movie, we have a story about dreams. Dreams is also going to be the mind, which I heard in the two previous, in Carmen's and Xiana's presentations. So I see this is very much connected to what we've been seeing in this panel. We have the reliability or the lack of reliability of dreams, which appears in both movies. In the case of Inception, we have world created out of dreams, within dreams. A dream in this world, I will be summarizing the plot very briefly. We have different worlds within dreams. So what is the role of the Ariadne, the female character that is appears in Inception? Now she represents the creative side of humans. She is named Ariadne, which is a clear reference, a straight reference to Ariadne, the mythological character. In the movie, she is a university student who designs, because she's studying architecture at university, she designs a labyrinth in layers within a dream for a purpose asked by the male protagonist. Now we do have this heroine, and we also have a hero. Don Cobb is a hero. In this story, he fulfills the role, the classical role of the tormented hero, the tormented protagonist. And the image of the labyrinth that we have in Inception is that of a labyrinth that moves downwards in different layers within dreams. It's a dream creation, labyrinth creation within dreams. In the movie Labyrinth, we have a Bildungsroman, that is a coming-of-age story of the heroine, Sarah Williams, who is 16 years old. and she will stick to this Ariadne-like stereotype, archetype rather, and I'm going to analyze how she sticks to that archetype in a minute. Now, if in Inception we have a tormented hero, in Labyrinth, the fiction side of this study, we don't have a tormented hero anymore. We do have a male villain, which is quite interesting to both see how the heroine interacts with a character, how that character is a man, and how that character is not human. He is, according to some interpretations, a character created by her own mind, which is coming of age. That's why it's a Bildungsroman. So Jareth, the Goblin King, is going to fulfill the image, the archetype of the male villain in this case. And here we're going to see how we do not have a labyrinth as we have in Inception, but rather a maze, and the differences between the two. Now, to start with, I'd like to provide a brief explanation of the very well-known character of Ariadne in Greek mythology. There are a number of versions about this character. Most versions, ancient versions, agree that she was King Minos and Queen Pasiphae's daughter. Therefore, she was the Minotaur's half-sister, and she's most famous for her secondary role, I would say, of the young hero Theseus, how she helped him get out of the labyrinth in which he got in to slay the Minotaur. Now, I'm saying she performs a secondary role in Greek mythology, in the classical myth, because she doesn't perform any action. However, we know that without her help, the hero, the well-known hero Theseus, wouldn't have ever gotten out of the labyrinth. Now, interestingly, she is also in some cultures related to Persephone, and to therefore the trip to the underworld, which connects us directly to the movie Inception, because the underworld exists in that movie, in the layers, in the movement downwards, in the labyrinths, down towards the core of dreams, towards Inception, which is where the title comes from. Now we have a movement downwards, which is a movement towards the core, which we can call catabasis. And we're going to see that this catabasis occurs down the earth, metaphorically, in the two movies, but especially towards the mind, towards the inner reflections, the inner being of these two female protagonists. Now, I'd like to resume a topic which has been already presented by Carmen Marquez, which is, in her presentation, Joseph Campbell's idea of the hero's journey, also known as the monomyth. Now, I'll be using this idea here to deal with the comparison between the traditional monomyth on the left and a female adaptation of this monomyth, quite useful, provided by Maureen Murdoch. She is a Jungian psychiatrist who takes ideas. She borrows the male hero's journey and adapts it. She noted that there was an absence of female protagonism, of female focus in Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, and she wants to adapt it. And I'm going to quote from The Heroine's Journey, Woman's Quest for Wholeness, which is her masterpiece, her main study. Quote, "In the whole mythological tradition, the woman is there. All she has to do is to realize she is the place that people are trying to get to." Now, interestingly, she's focusing on women, saying probably not definitely in Campbell, there is not the figure of women as protagonists, and very seldom do they appear as secondary characters, although they do. But The Heroine's Journey focuses fully on women and the stages women go through. Now in Campbell, we go through three main stages, very well-known stages: departure, initiation, and return. Therefore, we move in Joseph Campbell's monomyth from the inside of the hero to the outside. He has to travel the world. He has to get outside of the realm that he knows into the unknown. However, conversely to this, Maureen Murdoch moves towards full acceptance of female value, of the female individual as an individual. Therefore, we do not move from the inside to the outside, as in Campbell, but rather from the outside of a woman closed in her shell, so to say, in her consciousness, to the inside. From the outside, from the world where she lives, to the inside, to knowing herself better after traveling the world, both physically and metaphorically. Now, if we analyze based on this theory, inception, we have Mises and the importance of the subconscious mind. Let me quote briefly the critic Northrop Frye in his Anatomy of Criticism, what he says about the idea of the underworld, again, resuming the idea of the underworld, the hero's journey, and the idea of the occult, that which cannot be known except through certain rituals or movements. The hero travels through a dark labyrinthine underworld full of monsters between sunset and sunrise, which again, here, sunset and sunrise draws a line directly to the hero's journey, Joseph Campbell's journey, and by extension, also to Maureen Murdoch's journey, heroine's journey. Now, the first phase of Maureen Murdoch's cycle shows the separation from the feminine. That is, in the movie Inception, we have a role inversion from the very moment that the architect who has to build the world in the form of a labyrinth is a woman, not a man, as we would expect from an architect, from a builder, but rather a woman. This is already altering our vision of gender, of the creative genius. We also have in Maureen Murdoch's heroine's journey, the initiation and descent to the goddess. There is a moment in the movie when we have a meeting between the male protagonist's former wife and Ariadne herself. I had a little video here to show you, which I'll skip for the moment, maybe in the question turn if we have time. So in Inception, Ariadne, the young girl, the young student, performs the role of the architect, that is of Daedalus, if we go to the classical tradition, to the classical myth. She's also Theseus, she's also a traveler, she's the heroine, a female hero, we would say. But of course, she's also Princess Ariadne. She provides the ball of thread. She helps Cobb, the protagonist of the movie, in a number of occasions to solve the puzzle, the mental puzzle in this movie. Now, interestingly, labyrinths, and here we have in this movie, as I just mentioned, we have a labyrinth moving downwards. They have their own time, they apply their own laws. These two images show how space can be altered if our perception is altered. And of course, within the mind, in dreams, our perception is definitely altered. You have to get, in Inception, in the movie, the characters have to get to the center to the core, the lowest layer, which is called the limbo, of Robert, which is another character of Robert's mind. They have to travel through his mind from one layer in the dream to the next one, moving downwards. Now, the last layer in the dream is called the limbo, and it represents the center. It's a spiraling labyrinth because it has a center, and there are different layers moving around it. In dreams, we have time, which is clearly altered because, and this movie shows it very, very well, in each level, in each layer of the dreams in Robert's mind, time lengthens exponentially. But space is also altered in this world of dreams. We have a number of non-Euclidean geometries, which, by the way, also appear in the movie Labyrinth, as I'm going to show you in a minute. We have Penrose's triangle in the bottom image. We have zero gravity scenes, and we have clear cuts between the scenes. At one moment in the movie, we hear the conversation, "Do you know how we have gotten here?" And Ariadne says, no idea. Cobb replies, "Because we are in a dream." And they were in a dream. Now, moving on to the movie Labyrinth, we have Sarah's coming of age in a dreamlike setting because it resembles a dream very much. Now, there are a number of interpretations about this. but it does show the appearance, it does have the appearance of a dream. Maureen Murdoch shows that the first phase, separation from the feminine, in her heroine's journey, we could apply it to this movie as the fact that Sarah, the female heroine, the Ariadne here, rejects her role as a sister mother to her baby brother Toby. So she asks the Goblin King Jareth to take him away from her. There is also the road of trials that she has to go through. Now the villain, the male villain, places a number of hurdles, a number of obstacles for her to overcome. There is, however, no initiation and descent to the goddess. No, because there is she performs a movement towards her inner mind. So because this is introspection, we have no female character in this movie with which she interacts. The 10th and last phase in Murdoch's analysis is the integration of the masculine and the feminine, as that is the animus, which represents difference, and the anima, which rejoins elements. Here, when she comes together, when Sarah Ariadne here comes together, gets to get her two sides of her psyche, her reconciliation with her mother role, sister role, accepts it, she doesn't reject it, and she becomes a woman. A number of changes happen in her. She knows that she shouldn't struggle with the role classically associated to women. She stops seeing a negative side to it. She reconciles with herself. Thus, Sarah here is Theseus. She's a traveler, but she's also the Minotaur because, according to some interpretations, as I said, she creates this dreamlike setting, which is the whole movie. But of course, she is also Ariadne because she saves herself. She comes to terms with herself. She saves herself. She gets out of this mental labyrinth. How are space and time represented here? If in Inception we had a downwards labyrinth, here the center and the last trial is Sarah's confrontation with life as an adult in the final scene, when she has to recall the magical line, "You have no power over me," performing her final last epiphany when she pronounces these words to the Goblin King. Now the maze shows dead ends, hurdles, as I said. Time is altered, as you can see in the first image, because there are no longer 12 hours in this clock, but rather 13. And space, again, we have a number of occasions in which non-Euclidean geometries appear in this maze. This world belongs to the Goblin King. This is a magical world. He applies his own rules. She must adapt to them. A comparison to labyrinths will help us better understand the role of these two Ariadnes. So in Inception, we have a spiraling labyrinth, which is metaphorically represented in the movement downwards to the inner mind of all the characters. Time rules over space. In the movie Labyrinth, we have a maze towards the center in order to rescue the young character of Toby. Here, time also rules over space. So as a conclusion, how are these two Ariadnes represented? If we pay attention to the science fiction movie Inception, we move, as I just said, from Cobb's interior, blending of dreams and reality, towards the outer world. Now, interestingly, we never know if the outer world in this movie, which is accepts a number of interpretations, we don't know if this real world at the end of the movie is the real tangible world. In Labyrinth, we have a projection of Sarah's subconscious mind and that accompany adulthood. The heroine in Inception, Ariadne, the young architect, moves from her rational world, and she approaches the inner consciousness, her own mind, when she enters it at one point in the movie. For its part, the fiction movie Labyrinth shows the coming of age of a young girl into a stronger woman. Now, these are the two different Ariadnes, very much connected to the representation of mazes on the one hand and labyrinths on the other hand, in these science fiction and fiction movies. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much, Anna, for very interesting, and again, it connects in nice ways with the two previous presentations. So we open the floor for questions or comments for the three, because it does connect in a way. So we have Metka again. Thank you. For Anna. The stages of initiation journey in the labyrinth seem to follow the structure presented in the in Vladimir Prop and his seminal The Morphology of the Folk Tale, right? This is a question for you,
Anna. Okay, thank you very much, Professor Zupancic. I'm reading your comment. The stages of the initiation journey in Labyrinth seems to follow the structure. Yes, of course. I've chosen in the morphology of the folk tale, you have a number of references to it. Only I have taken Joseph Campbell for the idea that he shows the hero's journey, and Murdoch, the feminist critic, draws very much on the hero's journey presented by Campbell. Now, in Vladimir Prop, you have an analysis of folk tales. I don't know to what extent could you actually connect mythical character with a tale, with a folk tale. Now, I'm sure that you can do it. Only right now, I don't know actually to what extent this theoretical framework would apply to the analysis of classical mythology, the hero's journey and the heroine's journey. Thank you very much again, Professor Zupancic.
We have more questions for Carmen also, and some comments that I will read in a minute, but just to follow on what Anna was mentioning in reply to Professor Zupancic. Campbell's monomyth is based mostly on Jungian, but it is true that it shares many characteristics with Prop analysis of the fairy tale. And basically, this is one of the questions I asked yesterday during Professor Buxton's lecture. And the reason why is that from the point of view of neuroscience, this is a kind of a basic metaphoric structure in our minds. So it's not casual that it appears in many different models. So it's just a comment. Okay, so we have a question from Eva to Carmen, and maybe Carmen, you can read the questions and the question and then answer it. Thanks.
And I also have a question or comment for Anna in relation to her the title of her presentation, because she's referring to female empower, right? And however, I wonder in this resonification process, to what extent that female power addresses diversity and inclusivity in terms of multicultural societies or meanings, or are you referring to this female empower as just Anglo-European white middle class?
Thank you, Professor Sotelo. In fact, I'm not considering cross-cultural references. Dealing with the heroine's journey, how it applies to the two, connecting it with Ariadne. But there was no space for cross-cultural references, cross-cultural other than the myth itself, in these two stories, based on the movies I am using as references.
So the female empower that you are referring in your presentation, it's can you make it explicit?
The female empowerment is, which is, thank you by the way very much, because in one of the movies, this female empowerment is considerably more visible than in the other. Now, in the classical myth, in fact, Ariadne, the princess, the Greek princess, is not empowered at all. She was abandoned by Theseus little after they got married. She was abandoned in the island of Naxos. I mean, she is not empowered. She is abandoned. She is rejected, and she has been long neglected. In these two references to Ariadne, in Inception, Ariadne is I would have I still miss in this movie. I mean, there are a number of good references to the classical myth. I still miss, however, some more straightforward references to empowerment, because she does appear at first, and I don't think it's Christopher Nolan's fault. It's just that the movie is so dense in itself, so philosophically dense in itself, that including more things, more references to the classical mythology would make it simply impossible to understand. Now, I do miss, as I was saying, some more psychological depth in this character, because there is this reference, and you really have to go deep into the analysis of the heroine here in order to understand how she is empowered. But she is from the beginning, in the sense that she creates the world in which they all get into. The very movie, half of the movie, in fact, and where the action and the real story takes place because she, Ariadne, has created this world thanks to her. If she had not created this world, the whole movie would not be possible. The whole plot that they have to, the whole plot of this movie would not be possible. They have to travel the dreams, which she has helped to create. So in that sense, she does have power, that power, which we would not originally expect or classically expect from a woman. Yet, as I was saying, she does also partly stick to the classical companion stereotype, archetype that appears in the myth, because she does accompany the male hero, but she saves him in a number of times, and it is thanks to her by the end of the movie that they all solve the problem and they all get out of the dream, if you interpret this as a dream and the end as reality. As for the other movie, Sarah, in the movie Labyrinth, this fiction movie, interestingly, she hates her one part of herself, that part which connects her to classical mothers, to the classical role as a mother, as a sister. She rejects that. She hates that part. She doesn't want to stick to that part. She wants to break free from all these patriarchal chains, which is why she enters this whole new magical world, which her mind, according to some interpretations, as I said, has created. Now, this is governed by a man, so she escapes a world, a male-dominated world in which she should become a mother in order to become, again, the creator of this world of fantasy. Now, if she eventually gets out of this world, it's solely thanks to the recollection of this last memory. You have no power over me, which she utters before the Goblin King. That is the one moment when we see that she is empowered and she's finally getting ready to come back to the real world as a fully completed, articulated woman, physically and psychologically, especially. So that's why these are empowered women, one more than the other for sure.
Okay, thanks, Anna. So maybe Carmen can read her question. Can you see the question by Eva? Carmen?
Yeah.
Yes?
So,
okay.
So thanks, Eva, for your question. I'm going to read it aloud. So I thought your reading of the female patient's memoirs as heroic quest very intriguing. Thank you, indeed. However, I was wondering how will you reach the therapeutic process in relation to the heroine's journey? I mean, does it enable the patient to achieve their final apotheosis, or is it generally criticized from a feminist point of view? In other words, will you say that the therapist could be labeled as a helper or another trial that the female patient has to confront in order to be reborn? So in this case, from the perspective of these girls, I mean, we have to take into account that they are autobiographers. So this is their own experience. And from my personal experience, I mean, I for a lot of years, like my sister has suffered from anorexia nerviosa. So I know how she saw it. So basically they enter voluntarily in this underworld, and they have to overcome this obstacle by themselves. So first of all, in these books, most of the doctors are male doctors, and they see them as a authority figure that inflicts like fear on them. So they feel fear because the only things they do is like drug dosage, and that they can, if they get worse, they can send her to another ward, even worse. So instead of being a helper or a guide, that it what they should be, they see him, the doctor figure, as another trial that they have to overcome. And regarding the hero quest, in this case, like in Anna Briel's reading, is not that they don't follow the typical monomyth structure, because sometimes this final stage, they are opposed to the final stage. So the rebirth sometimes just doesn't happen.
Okay, thanks, Carmen. So let me read the last comment here and question by Christina. I think this one is for Anna, but of course, the others can also comment if you wish. Thank you for this presentation. Seems to me that in the two examples you chose, Ariadne's empowerment is very much related to her assuming also the role of Daedalus, who both created and defeated the labyrinth. Does that suggest that a shift towards traditionally masculine hard science is what women should pursue? This is also an interesting question, Christina, because it connects to my paper later on. So because I do talk about STEM and STEAM, you know, hard science and sub-sciences. And it also connects to research that Professor Shiana Sotelo is doing on soft transferable skills like critical thinking. So it's it introduces a very interesting perspective. So I don't know who wants to answer this. I think the question is for Anna.
Thank you. Thank you very much to Eva, who was commenting, yes, about the role of
Christina is the one that commented on Ariadne's empowerment.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then I'm missing the specific question in the forum. Yeah, in fact, in several stories, the creator of the labyrinth is also, because he or she is the one who creates the labyrinth, he or she is the one who knows the obstacles and the one who knows how to defeat them very often. In the case of the myth, Daedalus didn't really know how to get out. His son Icarus had to get these wings built in order to get out, and we all know the ending of Icarus. In the case of these two movies, the two girls could be said to build these labyrinths or mazes made of dreams, within dreams in some cases. So because they designed them, I wonder, I know that if you create something, sometimes you will know the solution, the way out of it, some others you won't. In the case of the movie, I was saying, in the case of the movie Inception, she knows the way out, but she also knows that she has to undergo a number of trials, like in real life, both for the male and for the hero and the heroine's journeys. And as for Sarah in the movie Labyrinth, the same. If we interpret this movie as a kind of dream, a story, fiction, fictional dream, a world of fantasy, she has to find herself. She has to, she has built, we could say, she has built this fantasy world in order to have a path to undergo, and in order to be both Daedalus, Ariadne, and in a way also the Minotaur creating the obstacles, metaphorical projections to the obstacles in real life that she has to overcome. So she takes all these things, projects them into this world of fantasy, and in a way that helps her come back stronger, and somehow after this rebirth and coming to the world again. I believe, I don't know if I've answered your question, your comment, Cristina. Professor Varela, Professor Lopez Varela, I don't know if this is, if I have answered Cristina's comment.
I think so. There are no more comments. There is a comment by Professor Zivancic regarding folk tales and their relation to mythical structure. And this is again a topic that will take us, it will take some discussion, but maybe we can leave this until the end because like we have about 30 minutes left. So maybe after I give my paper, we can maybe pursue these loose trails that are there for discussion, if you agree. Okay, so thank you. And I think Professor Sotelo is going to present me.
Yes. So with great pleasure, I'm going to introduce Professor Asunción López Varela. Asun López Varela research interests are comparative literature, cognitive and intermediate semiotics. She coordinates the research group SIM, Studies on Intermediality and Intercultural Mediation, and has collaborated in projects related to myth criticism, such as Athis Galatea and Aglaya. And today, she's going to talk to us about Margaret Cavendish, The Blything World, 1666, Myths and Speculative Fiction. Thank you so much, Asun.
Thank you, Shiana. Thank you. I want to start by thanking, of course, Comunidad de Madrid for funding this project, Aglaya, and the organizers, the coordinator, Professor Jose Manuel Losada. I also would like to thank Antonella Lipskog, who is one of the artificers of the conference, very successful. And of course, Adrián García Vidal and Julia Aldaba, who are managing the technical aspects of the conference. They are very complicated conference with sessions online, face-to-face sessions. So thank you very much, everybody, for making this possible. And let me start sharing my PowerPoint, and I think you can see it. Okay, so I'm going to be exploring Cavendish, The Blything World. This is supposed to be one of the first works of, and I'm going to call it speculative fiction and not science fiction. And this is one of the points that I want to make also in my paper, because science fiction, it's supposed to have science, and speculative fiction can be a speculation. So there are different things. And in the case of Cavendish, we do have science. So we could be called science fiction in a way, but it's not the main focus of The Blything World. So it has been categorized as the main, as one of the first texts on science fiction by a woman. And as you see, it dates from 1666. And it's interesting to explore from the point of view of the merging of paradigms. You know, here I use a little bit of Timothy Rice and a little bit of Michel Foucault. You know, they claim that there was a shift from the ancient mythopoetic paradigm to the empirical paradigm, if you like, or if you use Foucault's terms, which is slightly different, the notion of episteme, but anyway, it's more like cultural oriented, if you wish. So the point of the talk is how we find both in this text by Cavendish. So I want to show how we have this pre-empirical mind, which is contemplated everything external to itself as alien and unknowable, and how myth it's a way is a tool to connect the worlds, the real world and the supernatural world. And how, as the scientific mode, empirical mode develops, the pursuit of knowledge moves away from universal concepts to concrete empirical data. And the shift is mediated by technologies. It's mediated by lenses, by mirrors, by looking glasses, talking about Alice, microscopes, telescopes, and so on. No? So the transcendent is no longer empirically known, and myth is relegated to the realm of the arts gradually. So speculative fiction is a testimony to this shift. It inherits a body of archetypal myths, and this is seen in Cavendish work. So the paper reflects on the comparative fusing of the mythopoetic and empirical paradigms present in speculative fiction and the different forms of speculation, often fictional genres in themselves, and how they envision possible worlds and provide, through mechanisms of defamiliarization, virtual spaces where to test many of the issues and concerns taking place in the real world, as well as grounding for nostalgic imagining of other possible scenarios, both prospective, that is backwards, looking back, or as utopia, for example, or retrospective. No? So Cavendish work has been explored mostly from the point of view of gender studies, feminist studies, but there is an author, Rachel Trubowitz, and she asserts that Cavendish is re-enchanting utopia. She's suspending rationally conceived laws and institutionalized imposed order, and she's replacing it with myth, magic, and the supernatural. So she's one of the few authors actually that focuses on these aspects of how Cavendish fuses the two things in her work, you know. And this is also related to the topic of fancy versus imagination, which is one of the aspects very much discussed later in the Romantic period. Cavendish uses the term fancy, okay? And her descriptions, Cavendish's descriptions, hint to the defense of the mythopoetic paradigm alongside the empirical one. So, for example, an obvious example is the Empress, which is one of the protagonist characters. She's insisting on exploring Kabbalah and mathematical aspects. And the Duchess, who is another of the main protagonists, and in fact is Cavendish herself, she puts herself into the story. She advises her, and I quote, to make a poetical or romantical Kabbalah, wherein you can use metaphors, allegories, similitudes, and interpret them as you please. So from this beginning, we can also see how one of the topics that she's going to explore in this book is the topic of alchemy. Let me move on the slides. You have here the cover of Cavendish book, one of the editions, the Penguin edition, and how this image is very similar to the traditional representations of alchemia, the embodiment of alchemia. Okay, right. So let's start by looking at the etymology of the term speculation. And we realize it comes from Proto-Indo-European spec, which means to observe, and from Latin speculum, looking glass, mirror, imitation. So one of the arguments in this paper is that the empirical proof becomes irrelevant in speculation, since the relationship between the different worlds is created, it's created analogically by means of similitude, not identity. So this aspect is critical in Cavendish's story regarding her questioning of the optical instruments that magnify vision. In fact, Cavendish's husband who was the Count of Newcastle, he owned a huge collection of microscopes, and this is one of the critical aspects in her work. And she was very much involved with the Royal Society and so on. Is this criticism that about the use of microscopes? So according to Cavendish, microscopes do not provide proof of the complexity of the thing observed. Okay. Right, so you have some images here about of Cavendish, and where the book it's published in 1666, and this is 1 year after the Great Plague of London in 1665, and she publishes the book, the volume, as an appendix to a volume which is on experimental philosophy, which is called Observations upon Experimental Philosophy. She's very keen on engaging in philosophical debate with people from the Royal Society. Okay, but she uses this mixture of a work of fiction alongside a work on science. The story, it's an account of travels to parallel worlds, very similar to some of the sessions in our panel today and this morning. It has many points of connection with our panel, the STEAM panel this morning, if you have time to watch it. So she goes to this inner world, this inner Earth, through the North Pole. And this world is populated by hybrid creatures, bear men, war men, bird men, different types. No, and it's especially notable for its narrative complexity, because as I have mentioned, the author places herself as the character of the Duchess, and this offers a meta-reflection on her own writing as a scribe for the Empress. The Empress is the protagonist, no, of the Blazing World. So also to point out that the interesting Cavendish novel has encouraged publication, for example, of Hughie Husband novel 2014 under the same title. And also there is a historical novel by Danielle Dutton, which is Margaret I, because she used to call herself that. She was very she was an empowered woman, and this is amazing in the 1600s. No, okay. The next slide. Well, the Cavendish Blazing World has been credited with being the first example of speculative fiction or science fiction, if you wish. And scholars have talked about, as I mentioned, the feminist aspect of her work. They have mentioned, for example, that she's writing during the English Civil War. Her husband and herself were exiled in Paris for a time. And feminist critics have noticed that during wars, normally there are opportunities for the disestabilization of gender roles. No, so this is something that it already happened during the English Civil War, and women were able to reach the publishing industry and do some religious and political activism. So this is very evident in Cavendish text. She invites her female readers to create their own worlds in her introduction to the text. You can see the engravings here, where both her husband and herself are appear in as equals in all these engravings. If you, I'll show you the next one. In most of the paintings that we have with her, she is on the same level of the husband. And when they were in France, they had this tertulias, these coffee reunions, which engage very famous philosophers, Descartes, Hobbes, and also scientists. Okay, and this is also interesting how she sees herself as an empowered woman. She was the Count of Newcastle's second wife, and even after their death, they're buried together at Westminster Abbey, as you can see there from the pictures. Okay, so let's start looking at the work itself to give you some to back up my ideas about this mixing of paradigms that I'm talking about. And you can see the frontispiece of the second edition of The Blazing World. This was published in 1668, 2 years after the first edition, and is now at the National Portrait Gallery in London. And it displays Margaret in a determined masculine pose. She's dressed in Greco-Roman attire with two pillars representing Athena and her brother Apollo. They're patrons of the arts. And Athena was the goddess of wisdom and strategic warfare, and the sponsor of the arts and crafts. And she was a rival of Medusa, and here Professor Zubandik might have a few things to say later on. And the engraving shows the Gorgon's head given to Athena by Perseus on her shield. No? You can actually, maybe I back up to here in this, when we were discussing speculation, and notice how I placed two images, that of Circe with the mirror at the back, the witch, and also this other illustration of the shield of Athena and Medusa reflected on the shield. No, so this appears at the frontispiece of here Margaret Cavendish, as you can see. Okay, Medusa there. Right. So Apollo was the god of sun and light. He was the protector against evil and healer and a god of purification. He was also prophetic and also involving thanksgiving through celebration, and there was a relation to poetry, music, and dance. Okay, so what does this triad seem to point to? Well, apparently we have these three characters here, and it seems to point, and this is one of the topics that we find in the novel, to Plato's concept of the soulmates. One of the themes in the Blazing World appears in relation to Hermetism and alchemic symbolism. This is a myth of origin and is presented in the symposium, and it talks about three original kinds of human beings: male, who descended from the sun, and mated with females who populated the earth. And these superior beings were androgynous, they were both male and female, who descended from the moon. And they were round, they had 4 arms and 4 legs, 2 faces, and they were all very perfect and powerful. So Zeus was afraid that these androgynous hermaphrodite perfect humans would rise against him, so he ordered Apollo to split them in half and create distinct male and female counterparts. So to some scholars, the representation in the frontispiece of the volume embodies the lack of generic conformity and an inclination to hybridism that appears in Cavendish works. You know, we mentioned that the Blazing World appears as a work of fiction that appears alongside in the same volume as a work of science as well. So the text displays a divide itself, dramatized in various ways. We mentioned the Empress and the Duchess, and in the story they reflect 2 sides of Cavendish divided female subject. This is what the feminists have also said, no? But as I mentioned, my argument here is about the mythopoetic and the empirical paradigms in her work. Okay, so let's move on. So, okay, so the question of gender, as I mentioned, is very important. It has received a lot of attention.
But without disregarding the gender dimension, I want to explore the text from this perspective of the dialogue between science and the arts, which continues to have a gender bias. And this connects with the question that we had earlier on by, I think it was Eva, about the hard sciences being a matter of men and the soft sciences or being a matter of women, no? And I don't have time to go into a lot of detail in this talk because I only have like 15 minutes. But Cavendish was very, very much criticized because of her visit to the Royal Society. She was the first woman to visit the Royal Society. And the criticism focused on her attire, her clothes, how she was portrayed as very full of herself and egocentric and so on. She was even referred to as mad, which was of course like Medusa and typical name for women who stepped out of their position in society. No? So there is also, as I mentioned, a tension between a combination of romance, philosophy, fancy, and fantasy in her work, and she debates on the topic of reason and fancy, combining them, you know. And as I have mentioned before, it seems to me like she wants to recover the mythopoetic. There is but at the same time, she is using many aspects of the empirical paradigm as well. And of course, we've mentioned Hermetism, alchemia, and magic, and so on. And so it's a very hybrid text. In the 1994 Penguin edition edited by Kate Lilly, she mentions that Cavendish represented herself as a hermaphrodite, combining masculine and feminine elements in her dress. And we have been talking about the frontispiece of the novel. But she refers only to this metaphor of hermaphroditism in connection to feminist aspects, and not so much. And of course, also it's very obvious the connection to alchemia, and also the discussion between vitalism and naturalism, the philosophy that was taking place at this time. Okay, and you have the quotes there on your screen, no? Art is not only gross in comparison to nature, but for the most part, the form and defective, and at best produces mixed or hermaphroditical figures. That is a third figure between nature and art. So this is a quote from Cavendish, pointed out by Lilly in her edition. No? But as I mentioned, Lilly does not discuss the metaphor in relation to scientific aspects and the discussion between STEM and STEAM, fact, fiction, and so on. No? You have a second quotation there from Lilly herself. She only mentions that it's a powerful negotiation of gender and genre and of sexual ideology, privileging the hermaphroditic as an arena for mobility, supplementarity, particularly enabling to women. Okay. So the following slide, I'm not going to read the quotation, it's the preface to The Blazing World, but because of lack of time, you have here another engraving in which Cavendish appears herself here with a group of women, her readers, and so on, because she addresses herself, and it's very interesting, as the creatoress. And she calls herself Margaret the First. You know, I'm the first woman who is actually trying to use science and fiction as an as a form of empowerment. Okay, and it begins with an address to all noble, worthy ladies, and so on. So this is the paragraph that you have on your screen. And then the following also, it's another quote from the preface again, in which you can find this assertion of her personality, no? Since I cannot be Henry V or Charles II yet, I will endeavor to be Margaret I. Okay, so it's very interesting, and it's also very interesting to explore reception among the male men, and particularly the scientists in the Royal Society. And well, Alexander Pope was very critical. There was very many of them who were very, very critical of this position of empowerment that she assumes. So let me maybe just mention a little bit about the narrative, and yeah, you have some quotations there about the discussion and her questioning of science. Okay, so I mentioned that central to her narrative is the inquiry about natural science and the new empirical way of approaching the examination of the natural world, of the natural world. You have there the quotation: "We take more delight in artificial delusions than in natural truth." So she's criticizing the use of the microscopes in this sense, the lenses. And remember, we were talking about the speculation earlier on and the origin of the term and so on. And she argued for the internal complexity of organism beyond what the scientists might be able to see with the magnifying lenses. And this is something that John Locke was also expressing concerns about a couple of years after Cavendish. Also, you have another quotation there, and in which she says, "Those art are the best and surest informers that alter nature's least, and they are the greatest deluders that alter nature most." So she's she's voicing a claim that is also still present in our days of media connectivity, stressing the use of mechanical forms of technology and applied science, and how they, what she's claiming basically is that we have to use the art as well as a way of learning forms of critical thinking skills. I also want to point out, and I know that we have 10 minutes, so I have to be finishing like in less than 5. Similarities with, of course, and the work developed during the Romantic period, and she's like a precursor of some of the discussions taking place in the Romantic period, and not only in the Romantic period, but you have there this text by C.P. Snow, "The Two Cultures and the Scientific Revolution," in which he begins to talk about the contemporary debate on the discussion between STEM and STEAM, the hard sciences versus the soft sciences, and how and now we're moving towards incorporating these soft skills, not having these hard sciences there. So, and of course, the whole thing about the hermaphroditism and androgynous qualities are also present in Shelley and in Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. And you have there an illustration that tries to make the point, And the quotation: "The reason must stoop to sense." So empirical science has to also be aware of, we need to think critically, the conceptor to the artist. She's very, very clear about this. Which will be the way to bring in ignorance instead of advancing knowledge. For when the light of reason begins to be eclipsed, darkness of understanding must need to follow. Okay, so this is the main point that I want to make. I don't know how much time I have. I don't have many minutes. I was going to tell you, well, I mentioned already, the book starts with similarities with Shakespeare, The Tempest. We have a shipwreck. We have this lady who it's called a lady, and she is rescued, and she falls into this hollow earth, these other dimensions inside in the earth, and she's being rescued there by these creatures. And the emperor of this world likes her very much, and he marries her. And after that, the rest of the story, it's about the empress inquiring about the world, the concepts in that world. And there's a lot of information about science and about alchemia and about the connection between the spiritual world and about the physical world. We have these like spirits who are the ones that are most knowledgeable, and they talk to the empress. And as I mentioned, it's very interesting that we also have the Duchess. The Duchess is Cavendish herself, who comes in, and she becomes like the secretary, a scribe to the empress, and also approaches some of the topics related to this discussion between science and myth, science and arts, and the importance of either one or all of the two. Okay, I want to maybe just show you a couple of quotations that you get an idea of the text. He talks about the hybrid creatures as being very excellent augurers, which is clear they counted more necessary and beneficial than the use of compasses, carats, and watches. So you can see that she's using here like magic and comparing it to science and saying that they are magic might be more useful than science. So we have this very hybrid text, which is questioning the work of science and experimental philosophers and so on. And I think I need to conclude. Well, just want to mention the emphasis on the hidden aspects of nature. And one of the most important points that she tries to make, and this one in red here on your screen, is the idea of the multiplicity embedded in the one. There is no beginning in nature, not of the particulars. By reason, nature is eternal and infinite, and her particulars are subject to infinite changes and transmutations by virtue of their own corporeal figurative self-motion, so that there's nothing new in nature, not properly a beginning of anything. And then you have a longer quotation there, but I'm not going to read it because we're already out of time. But basically, the idea of this hybridity, this complexity of the world, but at the same time, a simplicity in the one. And of course, a lot of the text it owes a lot to the Hermetic tradition, the alchemic tradition, esotericism, and so on. But fundamentally, what I wanted to point out is, and I hope that some of the quotations made it clear, that this is a very hybrid text that questions science, that questions empiricism, and presents the mythopoetic paradigm alongside the empirical paradigm, and the question of why women also need to be there, how the arts are a valid form of knowledge, because they introduce aspects as important as critical awareness, for instance. So thank you very much, and I hope that I was rushing a little bit. It's a very complicated text. So thank you a lot for your attention, and I hope you got a little bit of the message. I don't know, I think we could be almost out of time because it's already, I'm going to stop sharing. And I don't know if we have time for questions. Metka, Cavendish, a true spiritual seeker, knowing ancient myths and schools of thought so well, obviously a rare personality from the period, extremely daring. Yes, incarnation of Medusa. Exactly, Metka, thanks. So basically, she's combining myths and science. Yes, yes. And we have another message here. I find the final quote fascinating because on the one hand, it's a Pythagorean idea coming out of the Neoplatonists. On the other, and it's like early picture of early écriture féminin, transcending gender, sex, scientific, textual, and ideological boundaries. Could you please comment on that? Wow. We have 2 minutes. I don't know. Yes, I wish Metka had a voice here because she could actually talk very much about the Pythagorean and the Neoplatonist much better than I would. But they're very these traditions are very much related, and so I don't know if they are, if they can, if they can be something different. I think they are very much related in many ways. And about early écriture féminin, yes, definitely, this is Sixou everywhere. And of course, it's amazing that Medusa is there on the front of the book. It just is a real justification. And yeah, the transcendence of gender, sex, everything. These are the figure of the androgynous self and the hermaphrodite. It's also very interesting. The mixing of the scientific and the arts, and also transcendent. It transcends not only ideological boundaries, but also all kind of boundaries, knowledge boundaries. This is why the question of the episteme, talking about Foucault. Okay, so I think it's up to Antonella, and we might need to close.
Thank you so much, Asun, for moderating this fascinating session, and for all of you speakers. Yes, unfortunately, we'll have to end the session now because we have another one coming up in half an hour, and we have to get ready. But I hope that we'll continue some of the discussions maybe in later sessions, or tomorrow or Friday. There's still a lot to come. So thank you all very much, and hope to see you in the next sessions. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.